Okay, so right now we have this thing showing where it's setting the label on that second page, but we really want to have a list of the bosses for the selected dungeon. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and pass the selected dungeon to this guy. So rather than having our dungeon detail take in a dungeon name, we're going to have it take in a dungeon. All right, and we'll say self.dungeon.name to get the name of that guy. So back here in dungeon list, we're not setting the dungeon name. Instead, we're setting the dungeon equal to the selected dungeon. We're passing it the entire dungeon object, because that dungeon object comes with a name plus the list of all the bosses. All right, so this should have the same output as we saw before, but we're accomplishing that output better. Okay. So click on Dark Heart Thicket. There's Dark Heart Thicket. Okay, so now I want to have a list of bosses here. So that's going to be another table view. Okay, so we're going to embed another table view in there. So we'll go into our main storyboard. And let's go ahead and get our table view right here. And then we'll get our embed dude here. We'll go down to this view controller and we'll dump it because that's not the one we want it to go to. Let's get this guy all spread out. All right, then we'll do a control click over to here and we'll click embed. All right, and this guy's going to be a thing called BossList. All right, so let's go ahead and create our new Cocoa Touch class. This guy is going to be a UI table view controller called BossList. And then for right now, we'll say there's going to be one section. There's going to be 10 rows. Our use identifier will be called cell. And we'll call this guy, we'll say cell.text label is equal to boss. Something like that. So we'll have .text, sorry. So this will be boss 0, boss 1, boss 2, just for testing purposes. All right, this is in a file called BossList. So go back to our storyboard. We'll let this guy know that he's no longer a plain Jane UI table view controller. He's now actually a BossList. He's one of those guys. Okay. Go back here to dungeon name. So now, in this dungeon detail screen, we've embedded this table view down here that should show boss 0 through boss 9 for right now, just showing that that works. We're not actually giving it bosses yet. Oh, forgot to tell my table view that the reuse identifier is called cell. For that, it's a common thing people forget. So that's why I purposely forgot to do it, so you guys would see the. So commonly, you click on this, and there's a reuse identifier thing here. Yep, I named it cell there because I called it cell right here. So whatever I name that reuse identifier for there is how it needs to match on the other side. And that's for that performance thing where it only shows, it only creates 12 cells or something like that. All right, so there's my bosses on there. But now, instead of showing these bosses, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to see the actual bosses associated with the bosses of the dungeon. Well, so inside of BossList, I'm going to let BossList know about a dungeon. Okay, so this guy's going to have a var dungeon, and this guy is going to be of type dungeon. I'm going to say, trust me, I'll be setting that guy. There's only going to be one section, but how many bosses are there? There's self.dungeon.bosslist.count number of bosses. And the boss here is going to be self.dungeon.bosslist at position index path.row. That's the name of that boss. Okay? So now I just need to make sure that I provide this guy with the dungeon. Okay? Now this guy is embedded inside of that the dungeon detail screen. So on dungeon detail, down here at the bottom, we have this prepare for segue thing. So this guy is going to get called automatically. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give ourselves access to, this is the boss list. So I'm going to have a variable called BossList. And I'm going to say self.BossList is equal to segue.destination as BossList. Then I'll say self.BossList.dungeon is equal to self.dungeon. So this will give me access to the boss list locally if I need it. If I need to reload the list or something like that. This guy, this is how I'm going to let the boss list know that he should be showing the bosses for the same dungeon that I'm showing the name for. That make sense? Okay? And I'm doing this. This is the prepare for segue is, this is during that moment when we're transitioning from this screen to this screen. But in our case here, it's during the moment when this dungeon detail screen is about to exist and he's embedding this boss list screen inside of it. So while that's happening, I'm going to grab the boss list, let him know about the dungeon that he should show. Or I'm sorry, let him know about the dungeon for which bosses he should show. And then let him do his thing. All right? So that's how I connected those guys. So now if I run this, now I should see the bosses for an individual dungeon. So I have Ashara. Here's our boss names. Okay, and this should be King Deepbeard. Why don't we fix that in our database here? I fixed it in Heroic. Okay, so they're fixed in all those. And then let's also go ahead and, oh, do we have that same issue with boss names? Yeah, we got the _m. It's so stupid. I didn't even think about this. All right, so we could do this at the dungeon level. So when we're setting up the boss let's go ahead and say let boss name equal this guy. And I'm going to say boss name is equal to boss name dot replace occurrences of underscore m with the empty string. Boss name is equal to boss name dot replace occurrences of underscore with space. All right, so this is going to clean up my data a little bit so it looks more like the name of the boss. So there's Ayavajara, King Deepbeard, blah, blah, blah. Those dudes. This fight sucks. Serpentix? That's not a fun fight. This big snake dude that comes out of the ground, and then you're in this big open area, and there's a whole bunch of like lava pits. And he comes up and you're fighting him, and then he submerges. And he comes up somewhere else, but two more is like a hydra, so two more heads come up in another place. You got to go kill these heads, then go fight him. Oh, it's terrible. Okay, just terrible. Huh?
No one can see her in the movies, I guess.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it's... Okay. Odin sucks too. That's a hard fight.
Is that a spelling mistake?
It is. Should be O-D-Y-N. Just garbage. Whatever. Okay. So now the idea here is, so right now we have it showing up for all of the dungeons. We click on any dungeon and we should see all of the bosses. Now what we really want to see happen here is we want to see a record of what bosses have been killed this week. All right, so when I click, so let's say I'm currently fighting Mythic Darkheart Thicket. All right, so we're in there and we just killed the first boss. This is the first boss in there. Okay, so we just killed him. I want to be able to click on this and a little check mark show up there. All right, and that check mark should get saved somewhere. Okay, but I should be able to toggle that on and off. So let's get some check marks showing up. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is inside of dungeon, I'm going to keep track of a second list of a list of boss kills. So we're going to say var boss kills is going to be equal to an array of booleans. Okay, and then by default we'll say self.BossKills.append false. This boss has not been killed. Does that make sense? All right, so then for a particular dungeon, we want to add a function that allows us to kill a boss. And what that's going to do is it's going to take in the name of the boss. It's going to spin through and find the boss name that matched it, right? And then go to that same position inside of BossKills and set it to true. Okay, so we're going to have func kill boss. That's going to be the name of the boss. We're going to say for boss name in self.boss BossList. Yeah, that's kind of the wrong way of doing it. So we're going to say for I in 0 dot 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 BossList dot count if self.BossList at bucket I is equal to name. If the name of the boss that we are that we just killed is the boss we're currently looking at, then we'll say self.BossKills at bucket I is equal to true. We just killed that boss. Make sense? Now, because I'm kind of thinking ahead a little bit where this is going, I also want to be able to unkill a boss. Let's say we made a mistake. I clicked the wrong boss. I didn't mean to kill him. I need to unkill him. Okay? So we're going to have a func. Well, actually, let's just steal this guy. Unkill boss. And that'll flip it to false. Okay? So whenever we tap on one of our bosses, if that boss is currently not killed, we want him to become killed. And then we want a check mark to show up there. If he currently is killed, that is, there's already a check mark there, we want to unkill him and make the check mark disappear. Make sense? Okay? Yeah, that's where we're eventually going. Right now, we just want the mechanic of clicking on, clicking off, right? So little tiny baby steps. All right, so let's create a function here. Actually, I'm going to steal the function. So we're going to have a function called isKilled. We take in the name of the boss, and we're going to return whether or not that dude has been killed as a Boolean. So this function is called isKilled. It's going to take in the name of a boss. It's going to return a Boolean. We'll go through. Now we happen to know that one of the bosses will be in here. But Swift thinks that, hey, you know what? There's no guarantee we're going to get inside this for loop. So if I'm still out here and we haven't returned, let's just return false. If it's a boss whose name we didn't find, we didn't kill him. All right? So that's isKilled. So these are all pretty similar functions that do something. So we should be able to ask whether or not a boss is killed, so that when we are, we should be able to ask a dungeon, has this particular boss been killed? If yes, set the check mark. If no, unset the check mark. Okay? Let's start with that. So we'll go back to our boss list. So here is our cell for row and index path, this guy right here. So that's where we are putting in the name of the boss. So I'm going to actually say let boss name equal that guy. And then we're going to say if self.dungeon.isKilled boss name. If that guy's already been killed, then we'll say cell.accessory type is equal to dot. If he's already killed, it's dot check mark. Else cell.accessory type is equal to dot none. Okay, so if I run it right now, they should all be, we shouldn't see any check marks, right? So nothing will visually look different to us right this second. But we'll just make sure it runs, and then what I'll do is I'll go and default all the kills to true. So we should see all check marks. All right, so I'll click on Eye of Ashara, no check marks. And then just to test our logic here, we'll pretend like all bosses start off dead. Okay? Now I run this and we should see check marks for everybody. Make sense? Okay. Now we want this to be a little interactive, right? So we want to be able to click on stuff and have the thing toggle on and off. So let's flip this guy back to false. Let's go into our boss list. And just like we handled on our dungeon list, clicking on a cell, now we want to toggle that boss, whether or not he was killed, right? So we're going to say, what is it? Did select row at index path. So this is the table view delegate method for clicking on a table view cell. All right, so now we want to go ahead and get that current boss, right? We get the boss name. So I'll actually steal this right here. So that's the name of the boss we clicked on. We want to ask the question, if he's currently killed, unkill him. If he's currently not killed, kill him. Right? So if self.dungeon.isKilled boss name. If he's currently killed, then say self.dungeon.unkill boss name. Else self.dungeon.kill boss name. So all that's doing is toggling some booleans, right? And then we'll say self.tableview well, actually, let me show you the bad way of doing it, then I'll show you the better way of doing it. Self.tableview we're going to call this the bad as well as the easy way of doing this. Okay? So I click on Ivashar, everything's off. Click on this guy. Self.boss. Oh, sorry. It's that. So this says go up to, but not including the count. Looked fine, right? But now what's actually happening here is after I toggle it, I'm going to go back to BossList. So I've clicked on exactly one row here. I'm telling the entire table view to go ahead and update himself, rather than just updating the one cell, the one row that I'm manipulating. So what I'm doing right now is pretty inefficient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let cell equal table view dot cell for row at index path. That'll get me that current cell. And then I'll go ahead and say cell dot accessory type is equal to dot none. Cell dot accessory type is equal to dot checkmark. Just going to manipulate that one cell that I clicked on. This is a little bit more efficient. We might not be able to tell the difference, but if you clicked enough times, you would eventually start seeing a little flicker from the refresh. So that's actually the more efficient way of doing it, what we just did. Does that make sense? They both work. They're both fine. Okay. Now, when I click on a boss and say I killed a boss, we want that to actually get recorded somewhere, right? So now we got to start updating the database. Now, before we can do that, I think we decided last time that we were going to do this, instead of authentication, we do this based on a unique device ID. Okay, so we need to be able to get the unique device ID for a device. So what I'm going to do here is, here, I think I can do it. Let me just write the code here for getting it. So I think it's let device equal device UI device dot default. I want to get the device UUID. Yeah, let's just look it up here real quick. Swift device unique ID. Current device dot identifier for vendor. Okay. So we're going to say let dev ID equal UI device dot current dot identifier for vendor dot UUID string, and let's just print that dev ID. All right, so every single time I click on one of my dungeon, my boss names, we'll see a unique identifier. So, that guy is, oh, we know it's going to have a value. So we'll just do that. And everybody's happy again. So we should see the unique ID for this guy. So there's that unique ID down there. See it on the bottom? Okay. So that looks unique-y, right? So we're going to say that's a unique device ID. So now when I select these guys, I want to go into the database, go under that particular user, then go under a week number. Now, what gets kind of interesting here is that WoW weeks in World of Warcraft are Tuesday to Monday night. All right, that's the reset. It's Tuesday to Monday night. So it's not Sunday to Sunday. It's Tuesday to Tuesday. You can think of it that way. That's your 7-day period. So what we need to do is we need to figure out when a boss was killed, which WoW week was that during? Okay, which Tuesday cycle was that during? So we need to get a timestamp, right? And then we need to store that timestamp somewhere. Now, let's see, what's the easiest way to do this? Well, for starters, let's start with this. I'm going to go into my pod file. I'm going to bring in another CocoaPod here. And this guy's called SwiftDate. Maybe it's called SwiftDate. So I'm going to go to the CocoaPod's website here. And I think it's called SwiftDate. Yep, SwiftDate. So SwiftDate makes it a lot easier to deal with date and times in Swift. Otherwise, it's kind of clunky. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to install the pod for SwiftDate. Go out to the terminal, make this larger here. All right, so this is my directory where that was. I just made a modification to the pod file. There's the SwiftDate thing there. So I'll go ahead and do a pod install. And this will give me access to the SwiftDate library. So that's what's nice about CocoaPods is we're able to easily go and get a third-party library and bring it into our code. Okay. So now let's go look at the documentation for SwiftDate. Okay, so we can pick an initial date and we can add stuff to it. So what we need to do is we need to get the first we can do this on a calendar year. We can get the first Tuesday of the year. So I could start with January 1. I can get the day of the week that is, and then I can keep advancing it one day until I get a Tuesday for the day of the week. That's the first Tuesday of the year. So we're going to call that well, I need to think about how because potentially you're going to use this over several years. Probably not, but potentially. We want to write it with that in mind. Which means, well, and actually this would be coming up right now. So I'm, if we look at the calendar for the rest of this month, let's go to month view. So December 31st is a Saturday. January 1st is a Monday. Bosses don't reset till January 2nd. So I can kill bosses that I kill at the end of 2016 are still locked out at the beginning of 2017. Does that make sense? Okay, because the Tuesday cycle has not started over. Pretty interesting. So really what we want is we want wow weeks. Wow weeks for the year.
Just simply say like after every 7 days just reset.
We got to have a start date.
You can put the start date, the starting of this year, January. Just Tuesday date as the first one. Whatever date it might be on the real calendar, you can just put it the start date as 1, and you can just reset it on 7 every time. You can say if the first date, if it is something this, if it is Saturday, go next. Till it is Tuesday and start from Tuesday. And if it is Tuesday and start from there as a week.
See, the problem is going to be those rollover when you switch between years. Because if I'm looking at the dates and I'm saying, give me the current BossKill data for this particular unique device ID for this particular wow week. That's what I'm looking for. And wow weeks ignore calendar year. I could start with the current date and then work backwards. Then you go with negative numbers. So the current week is wow week 0. And then as you go back weeks, so that'll be week -3 would be 3 weeks ago, let's say. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's make this simple at first. Now, I'm sure we can solve the problem. We just have to really think about the math. But given the time, let's do this. We're going to have an entry for each user ID. And when they save their, when they kill the boss, when they kill the boss, it's going to go ahead and just mark it as killed. Now, the reality is that I know every Tuesday that I can go ahead and start from scratch, erase it. So I can give myself a little reset button in the app that just clears the, sets all my boss kills to false. That make sense? Yeah, just a manual reset rather than having it be automated. That way we can finish it. Okay. So what we want to do here then. So with that in mind, we probably won't actually need the SwiftDate stuff. So let's dump that just so we don't have issues with it. Okay. So now what we're going to do, when we first come into the app, right here, and let me grab my code for getting the device ID. We want to go ahead and check to see if there's already an entry for this particular user. And if there's not, already an entry, we want to go ahead and give him an entry for all bosses. Think about that.
If you don't get that weekly thing, it kind of gives out it kind of dumps the whole point of resetting it. Whether it might be manual, it should be automatic.
Well, you could say it should be automatic, but from a player's perspective, I know that every single Tuesday it restarts. So if I'm going to open up the app and I can say, okay, well, it's Tuesday, I'll hit reset, slate's clean. Do some kills that day, whatever, and then what ends up happening is let's say on Thursday, I go to play again. I open up the app, I click on the dungeon I just did, I click on the couple of guys I killed. So at any point in time, I can look at it and see who I've killed and who I haven't killed. Does that make sense? And then the next Tuesday, I'll just hit reset. It's functional for the user, the actual person who's going to use it. Because really, what would be interesting with the having it automatically do this stuff is to keep historic data. So I can look at how many times I killed a particular boss. I could see this past year I killed this boss 107 times or something, something like that. Across, I guess you would have to have killed him across multiple runs or something like that. But okay, so what we need to do here when we first come into the app is we need to decide, does this guy already have, actually it won't be when you first come into the app, it'll be when I go to get the data, when I'm on the BossList screen and I'm looking at the data for that particular user, I want to know which bosses he actually has killed. So what we need to do is probably do this inside of Dungeon. Inside of Dungeon is where we're managing our boss kills. So what we want to do is inside of here, we want to go ahead and check for, instead of just automatically setting it to false, we want to go ahead and get this user's stuff so that we can look at his current boss kills. All right, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to import Firebase here. And this is pretty much the same thing we did in main activity. Actually, no, dungeon list. So we imported Firebase database. Then here's our reference. So here, let's copy some of this stuff. So we're going to do this inside of Dungeon. Import Firebase database. We'll give ourselves a reference. We'll go into Dungeon list. We have access to that reference. Go back to Dungeon. Give myself. There's my reference. So let's go ahead and let's try to get that. We're going to try to get the information for this particular user, for this particular device. So let's say that that guy is self.ref is equal to self.ref.child. Let's call this guy DeviceData. I need to get the, where's it in BossList? Oh, I already got rid of it. Do we put it in app delegate? Or I just have to rewrite it? Let's rewrite it. Let dev ID equal UI device dot current device dot identifier for vendor dot string. Okay. So it's going to point you out. Okay, that's fine. So we're going to say go to DeviceData dot child dev ID. And this guy should basically have a mimic of all the dungeons. It'll be a really bad looking database, but it should have a mimic of all the dungeons. Because we don't have a way of uniquely identifying a boss right now. If we had designed the database correctly, each boss would have a unique identifier. So we could just have a list of unique identifiers for bosses. And you can actually, Firebase will assign a unique ID to each of those records. And then you could just say, this boss has this unique ID, has he been killed? It'd be really easy, but it's not going to be easy for us the way we have to do it here. So I'm going to go to device data, then I'll get dev ID, so that's going to be my reference. So I'll say self.ref.observe single event dot value. I hate that. Why do they keep breaking that? Okay. All right, so there's my snapshot. Now, if snapshot break there. Else print snapshot.debug description. Okay, so if there's no data, we'll yell and say there's no data. Let's see. All right, so snapshot dot value is equal to nil. That's what we want. So when we first create a dungeon, we want to go and grab, oh, actually, we don't want to do this for a, excuse me. We don't want to do this for all right, I want to do this first. I want to get the name of my dungeon first. Oh. This is kind of dumb, but all right. So we're going to have this guy also take it a type, which is going to be a string. So type is going to be normal, heroic, mythic. All right. So this is our dev ID. So we want to go to DeviceData, to the device, to the type, to the name. That's where we want to look in our database. We want to go to the part of our database dealing with the device data. Then we want to find the specific device we're looking at. Then we want to go to normal, heroic, or mythic, depending on which dungeon type this guy is. Then we want to find the dungeon with that name in it. If that guy doesn't have an endpoint, that means we've never actually had data for that dungeon. That makes sense? All right. All right. So then we'll go ahead and try to read from that. If there's nothing there, we'll say no data. So if the value at that endpoint is nil, which means there is no value there, then we'll say no data. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and print out that there's data there. This is where we'll actually add the data right here. Yeah. So actually, with that in mind, let's do this. I'm going to take all that stuff. I'm going to move it up here. So we already have our list of boss names. Then we're going to go ahead and find out this user. We've assumed the user hasn't killed any of those bosses. That's our starting assumption. We might update that in here. So we would update BossKills. All right. Otherwise, we need to fill it with default data. So what do we do for default data? We're going to say for boss name in self.BossList. So for each of our bosses, we want to say self.ref.child boss name dot set value to false. That'll default that guy to that, right? Okay. All right, so otherwise, we want to get those values. So otherwise, we want to say well, snapshot is the values, so we'll see what they look like. That'll be the better way for us to do that. All right, so let's compile this and let's see. Self capture closer members were initialized. What do you mean before all members were initialized? Hold on, we need to go back to dungeon list anyways. And for our normal keys, we need to pass it. Here's our dungeon, and our type is going to be normal. This is going to be type heroic. This is going to be type mythic. Okay. Before all members were initialized. Self-ref observe single event of.
Is it possible that we can store that data locally on the phone because just the user is going to access that data?
Oh yeah, you can certainly store it on the phone, but then what's the fun in that?
You can just extract the data that is updated in the database,
Mm-hmm.
get that data, and store the data that you are checking in and checking out over here for the bosses. So it's going to be easier for us to.
Oh sure, but we won't get to practice writing to the database.
Yeah, we don't want to use that database a lot. That's why.
Well, you might not want to, but in this case, we want to update it. I mean, we want to learn about updating the database and that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, it's in the seller.
yeah. Well, no, this is just more of the education thing. That way, we can then decide. Okay, well, we don't need to write to the database that often. And really, you might want to keep it in the database so that you have a global record of who's using the application.
And one more thing is that for initial maybe month or something, you have to go on after 1 year to the tons of data. So it's keep increasing day by day.
That's why I'm saying we can store it locally so that the database wouldn't take it.
But you might be, I mean, if we kind of walk down the path here, we might say that you might be interested in running reports about your current data, your current users. let's say you have 10,000 users and you want to see, how many bosses are killed per week on average, or something like that, to kind of get a use case. How are people using your application? Or if they always store the stuff locally on their device, you've lost all that data. At the very least, it's an argument for why you might want the data. I don't think this is earth-shattering data, so I'm not sure how important it is. But
what you're doing, you need to do that in Android. So I'm just making it easy for me.
I think this is. I think it's easier to always read and write from Firebase than it would be to read from Firebase and store locally. I don't think it's necessarily going to be any easier to store locally. I mean, if you want to store locally, you can. That's fine. I mean, I don't think it hurts anything, but I mean, I don't think this is going to be substantially easier either way. Let's see. Captured by a closure before all members were initialized. Who was not initialized?
Maybe we can do one thing is like when we click on the boss, it shows one more page which stores the events. No, we are not going to do it. I'm saying that. This is a practice to create some other app so that
Self.ref observe single event.
Fancy statistics thing. It's like I'm winning a race by running alone.
Self.BossList is already set up there.
why do we have that bracket after with?
This is something called a closure. It's taking in a function as a parameter. So the syntax is not wrong here. I think the issue is that we're using things like boss name. Oh, hold on. Where did boss name come from?
Boss name.
Oh, it's
screen name.
yeah.
Is it because you're only listening to only one event over there?
Well, I don't think it likes me using BossList before it's been filled. But there's BossList right there. Self-captured by a closure before all members were initialized. BossList is initialized. BossKills is initialized. And we can do that. Get rid of that, so that's initialized. And then we can start name off as the empty string, I suppose. So the fix is to insert self, but then that breaks this. Guess we can steal, since it doesn't like us using BossList, we can duplicate BossList here. All right, so really we want this code. So it's this line right there that it doesn't like? Okay, well, so we're going to say let ref equal that guy. Actually, we don't need it up here. Here, we can just do this. We can do this. And then just say ref is equal to that. Then ref is equal to that. And then in here, we could say ref.child. Because then we're not dealing with self dot. Okay, so the first time through, let's just let it run. First time through, we should see our database fill up. We should see a new entry in our database called DeviceData, then a unique device ID, then a type for heroic, mythic, normal, then the name of this name is the dungeon name, and then we'll start setting child boss name for that dungeon to a value. Let's see what this breaks. Okay, well, it thinks it found stuff there. So that snapshot is this guy. Let's look at our database. Well, shouldn't have found anything there. That's our database reference. We're going to go to DeviceData. Let's just do this. Print snapshot.debug description. So let's see what that looks like. It shouldn't look like anything, right? Because we don't have it. We don't even have a device data section. So why are we still getting Eye of Ashara? It's pretty weird that it would be Eye of Ashara is the value at that. Okay. So this should actually go and fill up the database. So I come back to our database. Here's our device data. Unique ID, heroic, black rook hold. Here's all of our bosses.
Every time it will start storing it, the new instances or events.
Well, only if it's not currently there. So what it does is it tries to look for this, 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 and then the dungeon name. If it doesn't find that endpoint, it assumes it has no endpoints there and recreates everything. That might be a little bit weak. For instance, if we start adding new dungeons. Actually, it'll do that for each dungeon, so that's okay. This will do this for each dungeon. But I'm thinking, what if they add a new dungeon? They add a new dungeon into the game, then you have to add it to the database, and all of a sudden, everybody's data is crashing because they don't have a new dungeon. But because we're doing this for each individual dungeon, this will work. Okay, so now, second time we run this now, let's just make sure it works. I should get to right here because the data actually does exist. I'm trying to go to device data, device ID, heroic, normal, mythic, whatever, and then the dungeon name. If I find that endpoint, I want to print that endpoint. I should find it this time now because I just wrote it. So the second time I run this, I should get to this breakpoint on 54. And that's what it looks like. Okay. So now I can go ahead and grab that information. So this is going to be, I want the value of this. Let's see, so I'm going to say for boss name in snapshot dot value as string any object. Let's see. No, here, I gotta do it this way. Let boss collection equal snapshot dot value as string any object. So that's going to get me my collection of bosses. Then for boss name in boss collection, dot keys. So for boss name in those keys, if boss collection at position boss name as Boolean, so if that guy is true, I'm already updating our names with this stuff. Var bn is equal to boss name. Bn is equal to bn dot replace. Bn. Oh, actually, no. My kills work with the actual name, not the fixed names. That's good. Not the like spaces removed and stuff like that. Okay. So if the boss name has been killed, then we want to say self dot is killed boss name, else self dot unkill boss name, like that. What's this guy upset about? Oh, same problem. Oh my gosh, you're killing me here. Func process kills. Put all that stuff in there. Okay, we put the names in with their, okay, we don't want it like that anyways. So let's kill off device data here. We want to make sure the names match. Yeah, which is good because we don't want to do this. So this is where we set it up initially. Okay. Oh no, this is the wrong function. This is self.killBoss. Name is boss name. All right, let's leave it like this for a second. Self in method call process kills before super.init initializes itself. So process kills is going to go through, get to our device data, should fill it up now, and then we should see it the second time with our boss name stuff. So let's let it fill it, and then we should be able to manually manipulate our database, putting a couple of trues for kills, and we should be able to run it and see that. All right, so now our database should have stuff in it again. Except the shouldn't have been. This is a real-time database. Oh, we're okay. Are we okay? BossList, boss append. Yeah, we're fine. They should match. We're using the same things. My logic before was wrong. What I ended up doing is right. Because we are, when we do a kill and an unkill, we're doing it based on the names with the stuff removed. So that's okay. All right. So now I should be able to go in here. Let's just do it for Black Rook hold. Let's switch that to true. And let's switch that to true. So Elisana and Smash Spite, we've killed. So let's launch this again. And that was Black Rook hold on heroic. So we're going to go to heroic, Black Rook hold. There's the two people. They've been killed. Okay. So then, lastly, what we need to do, well, we need this to actually update now. So, lastly, what we want to do, I want to update these functions slightly. So isKilled is going to stay the way it is. KillBoss is going to take in the name, and then it's going to also take in a should update as a Boolean. And that value is going to tell us whether we should update the database. Does that make sense? All right. So we'll go through, we'll find our answer there, whatever. But then we'll say if should update we're going to do that. That's self dot name dot, oh, where's type come from? Don't have the type. So I'll store the type with the dungeon. So this is going to be, so this is self dot type, self dot name for the dungeon, dot child name for this boss, ref dot set value, and the value there for kill is going to be true. If should update, oh, where's my device ID? We're doing some duplication of code here, but we're also rushing, so we'll just let it slide. So we should be good there. Unkill boss should be false. Okay, so now whenever we call these, we are saying whether we want to update true or false. So initially, when I'm updating BossKills, we do not want to update here because we're actually reading from the database right now. We only want to update when the user's clicked on something. So let's, well, let me add in the, okay, fine. Should update false. Should update false. Okay, and then out here in where we actually click on stuff, should update is true. Both. When a user clicks on something and it toggles it, we want to update the database. This is the user actually clicking it. So should update is true. Should update is true. When we first read it from the database, we read in the data, we're saying, oh, I'm going to mark this boss as killed, this boss is not killed. I don't want to update the database then because I just read it from the database. There's no updating to do. But if I'm the user and I click on a row saying I killed this guy, I want the database to update to reflect that I just killed him. Okay, good. So now I go in here. Here's Eye of Ashara. King Deepbeard has not been killed. Let's see, those two had not been killed. Now I should have just seen an update in the database. I wonder, can I get these guys kind of close to each other? Because this is kind of a cool thing to see. See it? Update here? I'm in Eye of Ashara. So I'll unkill that person, kill that person, unkill, kill. That's real-time database. You're seeing it happen. that make sense? All right. So now if I run this again, let's kill it, relaunch it. It should read in from the database, see that those guys were true. So there's my Eye of Ajara. All those were killed. Now let's see. Yeah, really the only thing we're missing here is that reset. The reset button. And what would the reset button do? When I come into the app, if I hit this reset button, well, you could either do that, or what I was actually thinking is you do this. So dungeon list, we're doing that inside of viewDidLoad. I'm gonna cheat here a little bit. I'm gonna take all that stuff that we were doing and we're gonna do this. We're gonna say func load dungeons. So we'll put all that stuff in here inside of load dungeons. And the very first thing load dungeons is gonna do is he is going to dump all the stuff that's in normal dungeons. There's remove all, self.heroic dungeons.remove all, self.mythic dungeons.remove all.
Removing all the data.
Yeah, so initially those are already empty. So the very first time I call this, which I'll do right here, I'm going to say self.load dungeons. It's going to empty things that are already empty and then go ahead and fill them up. Okay, but now if I click that reset button, what I wanted to actually do is I wanted to go through and I wanted to actually delete my device ID from the database. Completely empty it. Don't go through and set them all to false. Instead, delete it. Then tell the dungeon, then tell the thing to load itself again, which will then reestablish all the falses. Does that make sense? All right, so let's just do that real quick. It's only going to take a minute. All right, so this guy now knows how to load dungeons. We're initially calling it from viewDidLoad inside of our
It's not kind of efficient, right?
it probably is more efficient than going through and setting each one to false, because then you have to traverse that whole hierarchy.
So you're accessing more database at that time, or you're accessing more database when you need to?
Well, in this case, I'm only accessing the database once
Oh, yeah,
to delete it. The other one, you'd have to access a whole bunch of endpoints. So I'm going to do a IB action func reset button pressed. And what this guy is going to do, he's going to start off by deleting this device ID. So let me do this at the end. So I'm going to do self.dungeonList.load dungeons. That's what we're going to do at the end. Before we do that, we need to empty ourselves out of the database. So we're going to steal this code. That should give me enough here to do. So this is in main activity. So this is the endpoint. I'm going to say ref dot. Oh, I need to import Firebase database. Yeah, remove value, I think I'll do it. So I'm going to go to that device data, go to that device ID, and I'm going to remove the value. And then I'm going to tell the dungeon to reload itself. Okay, so for us, right, and let's go ahead and put a reset button in there and hook it up, and then I think we should be done. So here's our dungeons. There's our reset button. Let's hook up our reset button. Okay, and right now when I run this, I already have stuff in my database, right? So specifically, I have Ashara on, well here, Blackrook Hold on Heroic has two things. So let's run this again. So Heroic Blackrook Hold had two dudes. Normal I have Ashara, I think everything was killed. Okay, so here's normal I have Ashara, everything's dead. Heroic Blackrook Hold, two things are dead. I'm going to decide, oh, well, let's go ahead and let's start over. So I'll hit reset. And we go into our database here, and we see that everything is false.
So it will keep updating the same database.
We change the ID.
No, the ID, this is unique to my device.
So it's gonna keep. I mean, like the same device is updating, resetting the data. So it's
Right. So what I did is I effectively set the value at this position. I deleted that. That's what I removed.
So again, you delete it.
I did that right here.
When you create it again, so you're gonna get the same value.
It'll reset them all to false.
No, I mean like, will you get the same device ID?
Yeah, your device always has that same device ID. It's the unique way of identifying itself. I'll click reset again. There's all the new data.
Same ID.
So if the same app will be on 2 or 3 devices, so you're just going to create 3 different IDs and 3 different.
Correct.
DeviceData.
You'll have multiple devices here, and each one of them will have the same hierarchy underneath it. All right. Did I already put this up on? Did I put this on GitHub last time?
Yeah, you put the last version on GitHub.
Okay, so I'll update this one. Source control commit updated from class on 12.7. Are you sure I put it up there? It does not look like I put it up there. So I'm thinking you're lying.
You put that on GitHub.
I put it on Slack, not on GitHub. Okay, so I just drug the full. Oh, I just put the code. That one thing that I thought you could. Let me put the whole thing up on GitHub so you can actually go and look at the individual files. So let's see. I want to create a new repository, new repo. Wow, lockout. Create repository. Here's that guy. Source control, configure, remotes, add remote, origin, that guy, add remote, done, commit, push to remote, commit 11 files. there's all my files. Actually, let me do something here real quick. I'm going to do commit again. I want to get that, and I want to get that added. Otherwise, it won't work. Extra stuff. It wouldn't make a difference to you since you guys are just going to look at the files, but if you want to be able to check out the whole project and have it work, you need those two things. Otherwise, it won't have the workspace with the pod file. Okay, yeah, so now there's a workspace up here, and there's the pod file. But for you guys, here, I'll put the link up on Slack. Class is 537. You want this one or this one? This one? Okay. So that's the code. All right, so your final assignment is to bring your Android version up to date with this. And it's due by midnight on Sunday the 18th. That gives you a little extra time, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask for extra time because
Well, we just did it in one class.
it's you.
Yeah, so let's. So here's today. So that thing is due here. The 18th. Make sense? All right. If you have questions between Sunday and that next morning, I'm going to be slow to answer because I'm out in the ocean. I will have internet connectivity though, so I will be able to check maybe like once or twice a day. So I guess if you really need an answer to something, try to concisely put it into the thing, like just say important or something like that, so I can get zeroed in because I'm on a time limit for responding. But yeah, so midnight on the 18th should be good. Sound good? Okay.
So is this the final exam?
That's the final, yeah, the final exam. Sound good? Is that fair?
We have to upload the app.
Oh, we have to share the link on the slide, right?
Yep. Well, or yeah, I mean, you either upload a zip file or just get it to me somehow. Whatever you guys decide is the best way for me to see it, that's fine. There's a small enough number of you that it shouldn't be a big deal.